Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, we recap a disappointing road trip for the Mets and what lies ahead and what's turned into a wild card race. We also have two mailbags, one down on the farm, and of course, one answering your big league questions as well. So subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel, where you can leave a mailbag question there as well, or wherever you get your podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today and subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. If you'd like to drop us a review, drop us a mailbag question with that review. And of course, those 5-star reviews take priority. Watch us on YouTube and also ask mailbag questions in the comments under the show there as well. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And Joe, the week that was not great out west for the Mets, especially the way it ended in Seattle, where the offense just had no answers. But somehow, at the end of all of this, the Mets only remain one game back from a wild card spot, as the Braves, who have dealt with a lot of injuries this year, have not played good baseball during this stretch as well. So the Mets remain right in the thick of it. They need to turn the page, especially as, and I kind of hate when we do this because the Mets have played down to some bad teams this year, and they've played up to some really good teams. But, Joe, this part of the schedule is nothing to fear like Seattle's rotation was.
Yeah, look, I think, and I'm not in the excuse-making business, but we talked about what the travel situation was last week with, being in Anaheim, going to St. Louis for a day, going to Colorado, going to Seattle. And I'll be honest, watching the offense over the weekend, they looked gassed, honestly. And, I know that some people called them lifeless and things like that. And I think that's not an unfair word to use, but it's kind of, to me, I think it might be a little more driven by that scheduling. And then, of course, when you run into the best starting rotation in baseball by essentially any statistical measurement that you could find, it was a recipe for a tough weekend. And obviously, you don't want to get shut out twice. Thankfully, you don't get 2 losses on your record if you get shut out. It still counts as one, whether you score 0 or 1 or 3. But yeah, tough weekend. And as you know, as games are on the West Coast, I slept through essentially all of the first 2 games. So if I didn't see it, it didn't happen. And we're just on to being back at Citi Field. And like you said, Oakland in for 3, who, theoretically are not a fantastic team, but since the All-Star break, they, as of a day or two ago, were tied for the best record in the American League since the break. So the A's actually have come out and played some pretty good ball. And I mean, Miami might as well be the 27 Yankees when they play the Mets. But these next 6 games hopefully are an opportunity for the Mets to pull out some wins and, right the ship from what was a very tough weekend in Seattle.
What we've seen from the Mets offense during this trip, and a little bit of a pattern this year, is when it rains, it pours, for better or for worse. It feels like when they can't get anything going offensively, they truly struggle to scratch out a run, right? Where they can't even, after a single, steal second base and find a way to punch that run home. They haven't been able to show off that style of baseball very often. But to be fair to the Mets, on the other end of things, when the power bats are clicking, specifically, it feels like it's been Lindor and Nimmo and Vientos during moments of that. And I know, Pete's going to finish with over 30 home runs. At the end of the day, it feels like when the Mets are really clicking, they could put up 10 runs in the blink of an eye, as we saw the final game against Colorado. And that's not just a product of Coors Field, because we saw the Mets operate this way multiple times against the Yankees this year in New York as well. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can find that switch on nights where it's like, hey, we're not hitting the ball out of the park left and right. Can we scratch out 2 runs? Can we scratch out 3 runs? Because there are games where the Mets pitching keeps them in it for much of the long stretch there. And then you look at them playing teams that will have a drop-off, and that'd be any team, the drop-off of pitching. Like you said, Joe, the Mariners staff 1-5 has been phenomenal this year, but you got to hit. It's not that they didn't win against a great pitching staff. It's that they didn't produce anything against a great pitching staff. And before Jeff McNeil's solo home run in Game 3, they were on pace to reach some very rare territory in terms of the Mets franchise and being shut out 3 times in a row. So they avoided that. But you get the day off Monday, you kind of get a fresh start. Everybody's home, a little bit more comfortable. And like I said, while we try not to play the strength of schedule here because they've been poor against the Marlins, you make a great point about the A's being competitive since the break. There's just no denying that it's better matchups than what they saw in Seattle, and you love that they're home. So we kind of jump into, that's the week that was, and now it's the week that will be. Joe, this feels like a time before they see a lot of games against the Padres, the Diamondbacks, and we know towards the end of the season they have a couple games against the Braves as well. Can you find a way to build in, not going to call it cushion, because it doesn't even look like anybody's catching the Padres or the Diamondbacks right now with the way they've been playing, but can you find a way to get up, a game or 2.5 against the Braves if they keep falling on their face the way they have? This is the time to take advantage, because in theory, if you could, win both these series, you could be looking at a scenario where you're a 1.5 or 2 games up on the Braves just like that, because their bullpen has no answers. Their offense has been inconsistent. And with the injuries they've had, the rotation is no given to keep them in a game on any given night.
It's basically Chris Sale, right? And he was fantastic in game one. Him and Blake Snell had 2 fantastic outings. I think they struck out 23 against each other on Monday in the opener of the Braves Giants series. But like you said, Atlanta, they lost 2 out of 3 against Colorado, including blowing a 6-run lead in the 8th inning against the Rockies. So look, I'm not afraid of Atlanta, to be totally honest. And building a cushion would be wonderful. I think this is going to be a complete dog race.
Yeah, I think so too.
I assume that San Diego and Arizona are going to come somewhat back to earth. I mean, Arizona, I think, has won 14 of 16 or some crazy number like that. And the Padres, they're down every day and come back and win every day. So it feels like there'll be some regression to the mean a little bit for them. But I think this, second, third wild card is going to be a complete dog race the rest of the year. And the Mets have to, we talk about the strength of schedule thing and how we have to try to avoid that, but look, this is what the teams that make the playoffs do. They beat the teams that they should beat, and they hold serve against the teams that are really good. And largely this year, the Mets have done the hold serve against the good teams part, and they've struggled to take advantage of the weaker part of their schedules. And right now, despite Oakland playing pretty good ball and Miami always being a thorn in the Mets side, the Mets are a better baseball team than both of these teams. So go ahead, take 4 out of 6 or 5 out of 6 and change the momentum here, because that's what they need. Coming off that crazy West Coast and how rough the weekend was, they really need a momentum shifting, couple games here to start the homestand.
And I think the glass half full side of this, Joe, is that they've kind of hit a power outage from guys that there's just no way they don't hit for power this long right now. It feels like JD Martinez has been in one of those. Outside of the grand slam against the Angels that the Mets should have won that game, there hasn't been a lot of power from JD. There's been no power from Francisco Alvarez. There's been no power from Brandon Nimmo, who at one point looked like he could have had his first 30 home run season.
Yeah.
I say glass half full, and Starling Marte is going to be back hitting for this team as well. I say glass half full because, Joe, there's just no way that those 3 guys don't hit home runs the rest of the year. Nimmo constantly hits them in bunches. Martinez has been kind of like that this year. He didn't hit a lot of home runs out of the gate. Then you couldn't get him out, and he was putting the ball over the fence. And now it's a little bit of the same where he's not hitting the ball over the fence anymore. Alvarez is a guy that could be very, very streaky as well. Now, he's been very beat up this year as well, so I think we need to be a little careful overreacting to a 22-year-old player that's dealt with injuries this year. But that's my approach, that the Mets offense was really, really bad during this West Coast trip. But there are guys on this roster that simply have too much power that, like Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, Mark Vientos, they're going to keep hitting their home runs. But those other guys at some point are going to catch a little lightning.
I know this is going to be very, very much a hot take after you get shut out 2 out of 3 games and scratch out 1 run in the third, but this is just too good of an offense to be this poor for too long. And I know since the All-Star break, it's been very much to the point you made just a couple minutes ago of how, it's really hot or it's really not. And that's been the case. And now, coming off the All-Star break, we're coming on a month of that inconsistent offensive performance. But it's just sometimes, we obviously analyze these things, but sometimes there's a little over analysis, and you just got to look at the players that are on the team and look at the back of the baseball cards and realize these guys can't have it'd be hard to see a sustained bad stretch continuing. So hopefully this is the time where things start to pick back up. And you mentioned Starling Marte working his way back. That can only be a positive for the offense. And, we'll see how he is from a health perspective and how they want to put him out in the field, because we know right field defense was a struggle for Starling Marte prior to going on the injured list. So, yeah, well, I think there's better days ahead for this Mets offense, and getting back to the recipe that had them successful for 6-7 weeks of getting enough from the pitching staff and scoring a bunch of runs.
All right, let's jump into Down on the Farm here. We have a mailbag version of Down on the Farm, so we thank everybody who got these questions in. It's crazy. I mean, if you told Joe 10 years ago that we'd get more mailbag questions some weeks on the minor league system than the major league team that's in a wild card race, his mind would be blown. But here we are, so that's awesome. All right, Alan Weinman 1081 from YouTube said, Kevin Parada seems to have found his bat as his offensive numbers are starting to look good. Will he be a major league catcher defensively? Joe, before you answer that part, I will say I think what he's alluding to, and you've mentioned this on the show, the last 90 days, and Parada has not had a good week, right? His last week was so bad that it's brought this down a little bit, but his last 90 days, he's had a 744 OPS at Binghamton. So Parada's a guy that gets off to these dreadful starts, and then he could have a bad week in there. But last 90 days, a 744 OPS, a 335 on base. He's hit 6 home runs during that stretch as well. It feels like the offense is starting to click a little bit for him at the AA level, Joe, a guy that just turned 23 years old. Where does he stand defensively?
So I will say Kevin Parada, I think he still can be a catcher going forward. Throwing out runners is never going to be his strong suit. He's going to be an offense-first type of catcher. But I think the amount of work that he puts in it, and we had Jacob Wilkins on last week's show, and he talked about the type of leader that Kevin Parada has become, which is important from the catcher position. And he works very hard, and we talked to him down in spring training. I think the receiving has gained some ground. I think he's getting better at receiving, framing pitches. He struggled to block balls in the dirt. I've seen some growth there this year. And like I said, throwing out runners, never going to be something that he's fantastic at. But there's a lot of catchers in baseball that are playing on a near everyday basis that can't throw out runners. So I'm not ready to say that Kevin Parada is going to be a plus defensive catcher at the next level, but I think he is going to be good enough where he can have a role as a catcher at the big league level if the bat continues to go on the trajectory that it has this year, which, you mentioned the 744 OPS over the last 3 months, and that's okay. Like it's not like he's lighting AA on fire.
Capable.
Yeah. The offensive expectations for a catcher are also lower too. So we have to take that somewhat into account. But Kevin Parada is a guy that he was obviously a highly regarded draft pick and a highly regarded prospect for quite a while in the system. And he's fallen down my list as it just doesn't seem like the ceiling that you thought you were getting is going to be there. But I still think he has big league potential. And, maybe it's a situation where he is the backup to Francisco Alvarez here. Like that is not what you want out of the number 11 overall pick. But there are guys that get drafted that high that never, ever sniff the major leagues. So it's not the worst outcome in history.
The next one from Chris Durkich. Joe, do you rank prospects by their ETA, ceiling, floor, projected length of career, or a combo of everything? If it's a combo, do you weigh everything equally? Would be interesting to see a list of guys you think have the highest ceilings in the farm system right now.
Yeah, we answered a question somewhat similar to this, I think like a month ago, maybe. So I don't project length of career because, man,
that's a dangerous game.
There is a whole lot that goes into that. But I really do try to balance. And I don't have a firm mathematical equation here, and I would love to lie to you and say I do, but I try to balance ETA to the big leagues. That is a valuable thing. How close are you to actually getting there? Because we talk about this on this show. The road to getting to the big leagues is often under talked about. You get drafted, sometimes if you're an international signing, you're moving to a new country at 16 years old, you don't speak the language, and you have to learn professional ball on the fly, and you go through all the levels of the minor league. So ETA plays a role. Ceiling, of course, and that's something that I think a lot of people that criticize my rankings, which are perfectly fine. I sure as heck love the discussion, but I think a lot of people, when they want to, make their own lists, it is purely based on ceiling. And I totally get that. Look,
Right.
I have Christian Scott number 2 and Brandon Stroh number 5. Brandon Stroh probably has a higher upside than Christian Scott does. But when you balance a bit of the floor and the ceiling, that's where I think Christian Scott gets a little bit ahead there, because Brandon Sproat, as great as he's been, he still needs to work on his control and command. His first start in AAA wasn't, anything to write home about. He struggled, gave up a couple home runs, walked some guys. And if you look at the AA numbers of Christian Scott and Brandon Sproat, Scott was a little bit better than Sproat was at the AA level. And a lot of the things that we are saying about Sproat now, we said about Christian Scott 6 months ago. And it's the fact that he came up to the big leagues and he had, a bit of an uneven 40 some odd innings that he pitched. And, that kind of dings it. But long story short, I try to balance all of the three. There's not really a mathematical equation behind it. I just kind of, talk to evaluators throughout the league and scouts, and then combine that with my thoughts and try to do my best to properly represent what I think the system looks like.
So, I feel like I can answer this talking to you as much as I do and doing this show. But in terms of the highest ceilings in the farm system, it feels like Sproat is the guy with the most, juice right now, because he's just dominated at every level. And now we're going to see how he settles in to AAA as well. And then I know he hasn't played. It's been a lost season for him. But from a position player standpoint, it still has to be Jet Williams, right? Just because of the unique skill set he has.
Yeah, Jet Williams has, I firmly believe, all-star potential, and I don't drop that too often. I think that is in there between his double plus plate discipline. That's a tough one to say. When he drew 105 walks last year, the last Met to do that in the minor leagues was David Wright. So that's how long it's been for someone to pull off that. His bat the ball skills are above average. He has sneaky power that I don't think he'll be a huge home run hitter, but I think you'll see doubles, triples. He's dynamic on the base paths. He gets on first base. Yeah, especially in the minor leagues, you might as well just hand him second.
Run around,
yeah. He's going to take second base. He plays all three up the middle positions, which I think bring a lot of value. So I'm very high on Jet, and I think that is shown in my top 30 that I put out last week, where he is still number one despite basically not playing any ball this year. And on also Ryan Clifford. Look, he went through that stretch where no one could get him out, and he's cooled down a bit over the last 3 to 4 weeks, but you're looking at someone that has the potential to be a 30 home run bat with a high on base percentage that you could kind of jam in the middle of an order. Those are two high upside guys as well there on the offensive side.
Right, and with Clifford, you just have to note, he just turned 21. There was that long of a stretch at AA where not only could nobody really get him out, he was hitting home runs at an alarming rate. The fact that he was doing all that while he was still 20, I say it enough, and I try to infuse this on the show, and you do a really good job of it as well, Joe, because this comes from the NFL draft so often for me. Like, age just matters so much. If there's a 24-year-old that's performing okay at AA, it's so different from a 20-year-old that's performing okay at AA.
For sure.
Because that's what factors into the ceiling the most. And that's why, we're so excited about Clifford on this show. Our last down on the farm mailbag question comes from Terry Goodmanson 2060. Thanks for the question on YouTube, Terry. Hey guys, Canada's biggest Mets fan here. That's
all right.
I will believe Terry on this, but I challenge others to step forward for the mailbag and say that they are the biggest fan from Canada or wherever you're from. Just a general question. I've heard it said many times how AAA is very hitter friendly. Is it because the parks are generally smaller in AAA, or is there another reason?
So the parks aren't really like generally smaller. It's much more like the environments that the ballparks are in. Like we talk about Brooklyn, right? Brooklyn is a spot where left-handed power hitters go to not hit home runs, essentially. And that's why the Mets pulled Ryan Clifford out of Brooklyn despite not putting up numbers that would dictate that you should be promoting him to the next level. And I think some of it's much more environment based than the size of the parks. And I think also the implementation of the ABS automatic ball strike system, I think has caused pitchers to not nibble as much, and they are either missing or they're throwing them almost down the middle. And when you're at that level, guys are going to hit those pitches. So a really good question. I think it's largely environmentally based, not so much, I'm sure there are some parks that don't have, the biggest dimensions, but largely if you go throughout the minor leagues, it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 feet to center. It's going to be in the neighborhood of 320 plus down the line. Like it's not crazy dissimilar. It's not like going from little league to Babe Ruth ball or pony ball or whatever. And you're going from 200 feet to, 380 feet and trying to, as a very little Joe, try to find my way down a 90-foot base path. Felt like forever.
Let me ask you this, Joe. I'll add on to this question, especially for the Mets and the move with Clifford that probably shocked some people at the time. Do you think with the amount of data and resources and tracking they have that they can use that and say, okay, Clifford has hit one home run and he's batting 220 in Brooklyn, but our adjusted numbers based on where his exit velocities and, just the factor of the environment and all of that, where they can project the numbers a little differently and say, in theory, he's actually more ready than more ready for AA than the Baseball Reference page might indicate.
That is exactly what happened. So that was very astute by you. They evaluated the batted ball data and they said, if he was not here and he was somewhere else, we think the numbers would look better. And what was very important, and what was very important was approach at the plate, because the approach going from high A to AA is just as important as anything else, because the pitchers at that level, they're now going to start pitching you backwards. They're going to start throwing their breaking stuff for strikes. And that's something that doesn't consistently happen at the lower minors. So you have to trust that a player's approach at the plate, in addition to the batted ball data, would, kind of mirror up. And I think that was, a spot on thing that they did with Clifford, and they evaluated it. Fly ball, like he's hitting the ball in the air and he's hitting the ball hard. That's what he does. And in Brooklyn, that's where baseballs go to die. You send him to AA against, again, like I just mentioned, better competition, smarter pitching, and now he's all of a sudden hitting home runs. It's not crazy shocking to them that this is what has happened with Ryan Clifford.
You're listening to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, where you can watch every show, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Joe, let's review our scoreboard predictions from last week. Yes or no, will Jesse Winker hit at least one home run? Joe, you went with no. I said yes. Point to you. Over-under push was at 1 for JD Martinez home runs. Joe, you went with a push. I went under, so I get the point on that one. Over-under push was at 1 for Jeff McNeil home runs. Joe, you went under. I pushed. The result was a push. I get another point for that. Over-under push was at 2 for Pete Alonso home runs. Joe, you wisely pushed. I went under. Pete hit 2 in the same game, by the way. So a point to Joe for that one. Francisco Lindor home runs was set at 2. We both pushed, and he didn't hit one this week, so no points awarded there. Over push was at 3 for Mets starters going at least 6 innings. This was looking good once upon a time. You went over, I pushed. They went under. They only had 2 guys do that, so no points again. Over-under push was at 4 for Mets wins, where we both pushed. They only won 2 games, so the under hits on that. A disappointing week all around for the Mets led to low scoreboard results as we each take home 2 points. So you keep your season lead, Joe, 43-36. This week, 7 games, 3 against the A's, 3 against the Marlins, 1 against the Orioles. Yes or no, Joe? Will Francisco Alvarez hit at least 1 home run?
My strategy, I'm just holding serve. I played tennis in my day, and if you just hold serve, you have a good chance to win the match. So I'm just going to try to hold serve for another month plus here and take home my second year in a row. But just to hit Alvarez, I will say no. Right now, I don't know if it's related to the thumb, and he's just not like
And
he's
shoulder.
healthy. Yeah, and
Bad
shoulder
too.
Yeah, so he has a couple things going on. So the power that we've expected from Francisco Alvarez obviously hasn't come out this season, and it's been quite a minute since he hit a home run. So I will say no.
I'm going to say yes because I'm chasing some points here. What concerns me is shoulder injuries related to power outages. There's always a correlation. 2, they're playing Torrens, it feels like, a little bit more, which might tell you they want to be protective of the young Francisco's body in this situation. But it's been a while. The pitching matchups are better. He's due for 1, and it's just 1, and I need the point. So please hit a home run, Francisco Alvarez. Yes or no? Will the Mets win the series against the Marlins? Joe, I will say yes. I say they reverse the trend. I'm not saying they're going to sweep them, but the Mets have to come out on fire at some. Like, you got to be like a little annoyed at some point where you're looking and go, man, the Marlins. And let's not forget, the Marlins have traded everybody since the Mets were losing to them all the time, and I don't think that ever matters. It just feels like whatever random is wearing that jersey is a thorn in the Mets' side. So I don't even think that is a point here. But the Mets need to know how important wins are right now, and they need to know how embarrassing it's been, their performances against Miami this year. I say they do win the series.
Jake Barry Bondsberger is homering every day, it feels like, for Miami. He's been incredible since the break. I will also say yes. I think it'll be the Mets will lose the first game, and it'll be, here we go again. Can't beat the Marlins. And then they'll handily win the second game. And then the third game will be an absolute grind that they kind of squeak out at the end. So we can replay that if that's right. But I will say, yes, they take 2 out of 3.
Over under pushes at 1 for Harrison Bader steals. What do you like here, Joe?
Interesting. It felt like he was trying to run way too much not long ago. And he's
running wild.
Yeah. And he's quieted down that a bit. I wonder if they're like, I appreciate the passion, Harrison, but let's tone it back. You're not exactly Ricky Henderson here. But I'll say he gets 1. I'll push. I'll say he steals 1.
I will go under for Bader. He didn't have a steal in the last 7 games. He didn't have a steal attempt. He only has 1 steal in the last 2 weeks. But you look before that, the 2 weeks before that, I believe he had 3 more in the 2 weeks before that. So you are onto something, Joe.
He's due.
They said to him, like, hey man, relax just a little bit. So I will go with the under for Bader, no steals. The next one, JD Martinez home runs, is over under push at 1. This is a he's due for me. I will push here for Martinez and say he gets the home run in the next 7 games. Martinez still has power. I'd be curious, and this is me, admitting something bad. I'm not sure how many lefties they have in these matchups because Martinez slaughters left-handed pitching, and he hits left-handed pitching usually with power. So the thing you can't predict as well is there's going to be plenty of left-handed relievers in this as well. So I'm going to go with the push for Martinez.
I will go under, and I don't feel great about it. I think that time has to come for him to get back into that power stretch that he had for, a 3-4 week stretch where they couldn't get him out and he was hitting home runs too. So I hope it starts this week, but for the sake of trying to get a point here, I will say under.
An 884 OPS against lefties for JD Martinez. If you are somebody that follows props throughout any time of the year, it's a jarring difference when JD is against the lefty on the mound. Over under push is at 2, Joe, for Pete Alonso home runs. You get to set the table on this one.
Let's push it again. Worked last week. Let's just do it again. I think, Pete is still going through it a bit when it comes to just each at bat. But I mean, all you see is if he gets that pitch that a guy misses over the plate, he's still going to hit it 450 feet. So I'll say he runs into a couple and I'll push.
Pete Alonso, it's been an interesting season for him. Everything's kind of been down. The power is starting to tread water a little bit where it could be closer. It's still a down year for him in total, but it could end up closer to what we're accustomed to with Pete. I'm looking into his splits for home and away. So there's nothing to take away here, Joe. He has hit 13 home runs at home in 59 games. He's hit 12 home runs away in 59 games. So the OPS is much different. Pete's been a much better player at home, ironically enough, an 819 OPS at home, 763 away. I will go under with this. Once again, I'm chasing points. I do kind of, in theory, align with you on the, it seems like I'll hover around 2 home runs, but knowing I need the point, I would not take the over. I hope I'm wrong. I'd love to see Pete Alonso hit 3 or 4 home runs this week. I'll go with the under here. Over-under push is at 8 for Francisco Lindor hits. It feels like Lindor, while still one of the best players in the National League right now, you know what? I was going to say cooled off, but in the last 5 games, Joe, Lindor has 9 hits. So it's not like it's like a bad day for Lindor is 1 for 4 these days. So I'm going to go with the over. What I like about Lindor props is that we can't factor this in with a lot of our typical props is you can do this with Pete, but really no one else. Lindor plays every day and he leads off every day. So you know you're getting a ton of at-bats, and that's the best thing you can get if you're chasing big number props like this with hits. So I'm going to go over the 8 mark here, Joe.
I'm also going to go over, and I thought I was going to be different going over, but I guess we'll mirror on this one. Like you said, he hasn't had that stretch of not hitting. He obviously didn't hit a home run last week, so maybe that's what really stuck out. There was just like a lot of singles, and he had a couple doubles, I believe, as well. But with 3 with Oakland, 3 with Miami, I think this is an opportunity for Lindor to clean up a bit in the hit department, and let's go over 8.
As we always close out the scoreboard, Joe, over-under push on Mets wins. It's at 4. What do you like this week? We both, I believe, pushed on this number last week, and they went under at 2.
Yeah.
They have 7 games on this one, by the way.
I'm going to push. I think it feels like the right number to me. It might be 5, but I don't think, I would love it to be a 6-1 run here, but I will go with 4-3.
Yeah, I'm going to push here as well. I know I'm chasing points and I can't align with you too much, but this is just what I believe. I think the Mets ultimately are going to win 4 out of these 7 games and stay above 500 on the week. And this wild card race, as you said at the top of the show, it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere fast. It just feels like it's going to come down to when the teams actually play each other in the most pivotal moment of the season. All right, let's jump into our big league mailbag here, as we got some questions, of course, on Twitter under Joe's tweet that he tweets out every week for the mailbag. So if you want to get in questions there, you can as well. All right, let's jump into kind of an interesting one here, Joe, from Chris Toomey, who asked, what are the Mets going to do if Jesse Winker doesn't turn it around? And the reason I threw this in is that it's not that Winker's been bad by any stretch of the reason. The sample size is small. He's hitting, I think, 286 in a small sample size. But, Joe, the one thing I will say that why a lot of Mets fans are thinking like this is there's been no power for Winker yet, and the on base has gone down. It looks like a guy that's pressing to make a big impression on his team, and I think ultimately he's going to settle in.
Yeah, I think Jesse Winker is going to be okay. And, I also understand that when you trade for a rental at the trade deadline, you are expecting them to come in and make an impact from jump, because realistically, Jesse Winker has another month and a half to 2 months under contract with the Mets. So there's not so much leeway with people to, give him a chance to get his feet wet and get adjusted. But in a world that Jesse Winker doesn't hit for any power and he's just a singles hitter that doesn't get on base, the answer is Starling Marte's back in a few days. Tyrone Taylor's been playing fantastic baseball. The answer is Jesse Winker becomes a backup player, and you split time with Marte and Taylor, and you give Winker his opportunities against right-handers from time to time. But I'm not in any way, shape, or form, after 29 at-bats, saying that, Jesse Winker is not going to perform for the Mets down the stretch because, man, it's one of those things that the stats may not exist for this, but he feels like the kind of guy that's going to thrive in a pennant race in New York. He feels like he has the right attitude and temperament for it. And, he's 29 at bats that just have been okay. And you want more. You want the home runs. You want the on base. You want him to steal some bags like he was doing in Washington. So I get it, but let's give him a little time before we say he's not performing here.
Yeah, I think that, and I think maybe, I go back, Joe, to the thought process of him pressing a little bit, maybe hitting behind Lindor and Nimmo, who just get on base at such an alarming rate. Yeah. You would think that's an opportunity that, that's great. He's hitting with runners on and in big situations, but I think he's looked a little different in those situations where if you dive into where he's hit this year, his approach feels much different further down the order. When you look at when he's batted fifth this year, which has been in 17 games, he's got a 391 on base percentage. When you look at him batting sixth this year, he's got a 563 on base percentage. So it feels like with Winker that, and they'll mess around with the lineups as they have, maybe him in more of the middle and the bottom middle of the order will give him an approach where it doesn't feel like he needs to hit a home run or a double to start off every single game. And that'll get back to the guy that was so patient with the Nationals this year, where things will get going for him. But it's been far from a disaster. This is not like when they got Darren Ruff. All right. Like Winker's had plenty of hits.
He had the 3-hit game in Colorado.
He could stand out in right field and be totally capable. This is not a Darren Ruff situation at all. And I think if the guys on this team were hitting home runs over the last week that are supposed to hit home runs over the last week, nobody cares.
We noticed it a lot less.
Yeah, nobody cares. Everybody just is waiting for that first Winker home run. All right, this one from that Donwood. I'm not too concerned about this last road trip, but it did show that the wild card is not going to come easy. Are there series coming up you guys will be useful markers, important, or even make or break? It's a long schedule, Joe, but the hourglass does empty out quickly when you start to run into the teams that you're neck and neck with. So I think we've hinted at it. There's just no way around it. Like playing the Diamondbacks, the Padres, and the Braves is a huge, huge test. How do you look at the rest of the schedule?
That is the games that I'm looking forward to. Like I hate to say looking past this stretch, but get me to that San Diego and Arizona 7-game stretch. I think that's going to be some electric baseball, and hopefully it goes the Mets' way, but that's where I'm looking. Atlanta, you have a few games left with them. That matters. I think the remaining games with the Phillies matter. Not so much for the Mets pursuing the National League East, because I'm not here to say the Mets are going to they're currently outside the wild card. So I'd be a certified crazy person to tell you that they're making a push for the NL East. But that is the benchmark of a team to play in the National League. So you have to hold your own against them, because if you go and you face Philly and they wipe the floor with you, that's going to impact you against Atlanta and San Diego and Arizona as well. So I don't think, and this is going to sound maybe a little crazy, but I don't know if there is an actual true make or break series that exists on the schedule, because I think we're going to be on this show the last week of the season, and the Mets are either going to be plus or minus a game or a game and a half from the last wild card spot, or the second, however it works out, a spot in the playoffs. And it's going to come down to the end of the season. And that's kind of where I look. Make or break is towards the end. I don't think, if they happen to lose 2 out of 3 to San Diego and Arizona, I don't think that means, pack it up, season's over, because there'd be still a whole, another month of baseball. But that's how I look at it. Those series are probably the most important, and make or break is probably not till closer to the end.
I want to throw something so crazy at you because it's so early to be doing this, but these are things that like real sickos, when you look how the season's going to end, kind of wonder. The Brewers right now are just in complete control of the Central. The Cardinals are in second place. They're 7.5 games behind them. I know the Cardinals are breathing down the backs of the Mets a little bit, but they haven't been good this year. It's kind of remarkable. They're 60-59. I give them credit for that. My point is, I think the Brewers are in full control of the Central until the playoffs. The reason I bring this up, Joe, is that the Mets' last series of the year is 3 games against the Brewers at Milwaukee. Now, with the playoff format, this might not matter at all, depending on who gets buys and all of those. Is there a world where the Brewers are not, and the Brewers have had some good pitching this year, where the Brewers are not throwing their best arms out there against the Mets because of that? Or is it the opposite, that since they are in such control, that they're a team that they'll keep everybody on regular schedule? And I know this is a question that most of us probably can't even answer this, but it's fascinating to me that the Mets are playing one of the best teams in the National League to close out the season, but a team that I'm almost positive will be playing for nothing those last 3 games.
We got to see what the seeding will look like. Like, are they going to be the top seed in the National League or whatever? I think that's kind of where it play a role. I don't think it would be a situation like in the NFL where week 18,
no,
Patrick Mahomes wears a hat and puts his feet up on the bench every year. I think it would be, maybe it's a situation where, okay, you're sending Freddie Peralta out there. We're not pushing Freddie Peralta to 100 pitches. We're going to pull him at 70.
Good point.
Something like that, where it's not so much, because you also don't want these guys to have this large extended break between the end of the season and the start of the playoffs. But maybe it's one of those situations where you're not pushing them because it's not that crucial of a win. And maybe you're not pitching Devin Williams 2 out of the 3 days. Maybe you're only allowing him to pitch once. So I think it might be more tailored usage, not so much pure resting. And Rhys Hoskins better not have an attitude.
It's amazing that the way the Mets season started could be the storyline of how it ends. It started with a beef against Rhys Hoskins, and it could end where they have to get Rhys Hoskins out to make the playoffs. I mean, if that's not the most, forget just Mets thing, but baseball thing, I don't know what is. All right, one quick one here that this is kind of a blend of like down on the farm and the pro one, so I left it in the pro, from Sean Hale. What are the early rumblings for this upcoming IFA period, international free agent signing? Joe, this is one where sometimes we get news, it feels like 3 years in advance. Sometimes we don't get any news until it all happens. Is there any buzz at all?
Yeah, there is. And I'll cite Baseball America. They were the ones that initially reported it, and I should look up what that number is, but the Mets are expected to sign Dominican shortstop Elian Pena, and he might come in as the top player in the whole international class.
Which has never happened for them, right?
The Mets have never signed the, at least not in recent memory, haven't signed the considered top player in the class. I believe Baseball America reported it will be the biggest bonus issued in the class. So for the first time, the Mets are taking a really big swing in the international free agent market. You know, Francisco Alvarez was a big swing in itself. He was $2.8 million, I believe, something along those lines. And I think Elian Pena might be in the 5 range. So it's going to be a significant investment. And Kylie McDaniel over at ESPN, who does a great job with this stuff, he wrote an article, it was probably a couple months ago now, and it was talking about like the next couple classes of, you know, players and, you know, how he ranks guys that are 22 and under and going in the future. And he had Elian Pena and Ethan Holiday, who is, as of almost a year out, the considered number 1 overall pick in next year's draft, the other son of Matt Holliday, who might even be better than Jackson, by the way.
That's remarkable.
Which is
if
crazy.
You look at what the 20-year-old Jackson's been doing over the last 2 weeks.
But Ethan may be just as good or better than him. And Kylie had ranked Elian Pena as just as good as Ethan Holiday. So, you know, something to look forward to. And, you know, we'll be talking a ton about him this offseason, and I suspect he will make a quick debut pretty high on my prospect list. But Elian Pena, that is the name to keep an eye on, and I think the Mets are going to be making their biggest splash in franchise history in the international market here in a few months.
And when is that eligible again to become official, Joe?
So January 15th is the signing day, essentially, where everything becomes official. So unless something transpires, Elian Pena is heading towards being a Met, and we will see him in orange and blue in a picture on Twitter on January 15th.
Yeah, and that went pretty viral, noteworthy in May. It seems like everybody picked that up. So that
Yeah.
goes to show you, like, once again, sometimes these things happen a half year plus in advance. Sometimes it comes down to the wire. That one has been reported, pretty much everywhere at this point. All right, this is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. Joe, big week for the Mets. I mean, there's just no way around it. You kind of want to put that West Coast trip out of sight, out of mind, in the rear view. You want to beat up on some weaker teams compared to who you've had to play. By the way, it's funny how we look at things. Like when we looked at the Colorado series, we were like, oh man, like got to beat the Rockies at Coors Field. And then you look at what the Rockies did to the Braves, and you're like, I don't think anybody wants to play the Rockies right now because nobody's getting out in that lineup. So it is funny when we look at teams like that. But
it is tough. It is tough. It is tough to play those teams when they have nothing to lose. They are playing
or everything to gain individually. Yeah. That's the difference.
Yeah, and they're playing carefree baseball. They're not worried about producing for a playoff push as much as I'm sure they'd like to. So it sometimes these teams are the ones that play spoiler. But I feel like tonight's game is an important one. Win. It doesn't have to be pretty. I know we'll analyze tough wins too as well, but win the game tonight, and that at least sets in motion getting you away from that West Coast struggle. Go ahead and score 6 runs tonight. Win 6-2. Win 6-3. Something like that, and just change the vibe. And sometimes this sport is a lot of the up and down of the vibes and momentum of what's going on. So coming off that, switch it tonight, get a win, and just get started.
Remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question, and we'll look for it for a future mailbag. As always, we really appreciate those 5-star questions as well. And, of course, you can watch the show on SNY's YouTube channel. Become a subscriber over there as well. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.